The plexi room, it's just down here after the second pillar, just turn left. Sorry, I started them.
You started this meeting, the first one?
Yes, but I'm on video. We started.
Just make us a host.
Okay, so
Just shut off your video. If you don't want them to see you,
it won't shut up.
just hit the button where the video is. Just open here. Just sit here.
Oh, okay, I wasn't clicking.
Okay, and now
Okay.
make us a host.
So what's your name? What will you be logged in as? GMP, okay. Sorry. I just started it.
Oh, do you have to?
Can everyone in Colorado hear us from online?
Yes, we just had some technical issues, but now we're running up. We did not start yet. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody, so in order for them to hear, you gotta be speaking.
Yeah, I will use it all the time. Okay.
All right.
Perfect. So a few minutes late. Apologies for that. Welcome. I'm not sure if the people online can see me. Probably not. But anyways, you can see your slides. Welcome to today's session. We are one of the first 6 to kick off this conference. My name is Charlotte Becker, and I'm the fellow of this medication adherence session. And also welcome to our online participants. For those who are attending online, please put yourself on mute. And if you have a question, you can unmute yourself. We have a great session prepared for you. I did not do this by myself. I had the luckily to collaborate with Marike. She's from the Netherlands as well, and a researcher and PRP involved in our group. Alison was also involved. Say hi, please. Hi. She's our PRP. Then we have Sabrina. She's taking some notes, also very helpful. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Ayano Kelly, who is the chair of the session, but was not able to attend this meeting. And Ayana, I would like to give the floor to you.
Hi, everyone. Big welcome to those that are in person in Colorado Springs. Apologies that I can't make it there, but very happy to join you via the powers of technology. I'd like to also say that Kathy Timms, who's a co-chair, is with me today. I don't know, Kathy, if you want to head into the screen. And also Aria Paley, who is our fifth year medical student, has been helping a lot with our Delphi analysis. So hello from Australia and welcome to the session. I wanted to start by just saying that I think adherence as a topic is so important, not just pharmacological, but also non-pharmacological adherence, although we focus on pharmacological adherence in our SIG currently. And it's important because I think one of the quotes that I wanted to share with you from Brian Haynes, a famous adherence researcher, was that increasing the effectiveness of adherence interventions may have a far greater impact on the health of populations than any improvement in specific medical treatments. And I think that's really true. I think adherence is a major common issue that affects people from all countries, all conditions, and that includes all of our musculoskeletal conditions as well, and can hamper people getting the benefits out of all of those treatments that are available out there. But it's challenging, and adherence research is challenging because the behaviour is complex. It's related to patient-related, health professional-related, system-related, so many different factors, medication, related factors that affect the behaviour of adherence. Changing behaviour, as many of you would know, is extremely difficult. And I think so any gains that we can make in this field can only be realised by building upon the knowledge of others and working together and improving upon what we know already might work and getting further along. And we can't do that unless we have standardised, consensus-driven set of outcomes to evaluate those types of trials, adherence research that we conduct. And so I think this work is extremely important. We've been working as a group on this for many years, and we're very excited to show you where we're up to and to also get your knowledge and expertise of all those people that are in the room today and also in our virtual room to further our work. So thank you very much for joining us, and I look forward to the session, and I'll hand back over to Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Ayana. I'm sorry. I have a pointer. Apologies for that. So what are we going to do today? So we have like 15 up to 20 minutes maximum prepared a lecture for you to dive into the field of medication adherence and the studies that we conducted. And then we move on to the exercises because we want to put you at work and to help us with our studies. And we have an exercise on the definitions of our domains. After that, we look into implementation. This may be a bit strange to those who are longer involved in OMRACT. We will explain why we look into implementation of our core domain set and discuss that in more detail. And in the end, we have a discussion wrap-up session. And I would like to have the session interactive. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. I'm happy to discuss these and just let's start. So medication adherence. This is defined by the WHO as the extent to which a person's behavior, and we look into taking medications, corresponds with this, what is agreed upon with the healthcare provider. And we know that 30 up to 50% of the patients with rheumatic conditions do not take their medications as prescribed. And if we dive further into medication adherence, this consists of different phases. We have the initiation phase where patients can or cannot start with their drug treatment. If patients start with a drug treatment, they sometimes struggle to continue. This is the implementation phase. They sometimes skip their medication intake due to various reasons. And patients can also stop early with their medication intake, which is called persistence. And if a patient is non-adherent, this can lead to poorer health outcomes, increased comorbidities, even increased morbidity and mortality. And poorer health outcomes, we know that this leads to increased healthcare utilization, which then in turn affects our healthcare budget and can also affect us as individuals, the patients, with increased cost, for instance, through the payment for our healthcare services. And if we look into reasons why patients are non-adherent to their medication, this can be, for instance, due to side effects, which are not bearable for patients anymore, so they stop taking their medications. Some patients forget their sometimes very complex medication regimens. They skip doses. It can relate to costs. It can relate to beliefs. Sometimes patients believe that a drug is harmful to their body, that they will not take the drug. So there are various reasons for medication non-adherence, which make it also complex to tackle medication adherence or to support patients in improving medication adherence. And therefore, there are also various interventions aiming to support patients. You can think of a technical reminder, such as a mobile app with an alert every day going off to help patients who are forgetful for taking their medications. Interventions can also consist of patient education, aiming to address the beliefs of patients and setting goals for the drug treatments. It can also improve the complexity of medication regimens. So there are various interventions. We also know that some interventions do work while other interventions do not work. And what we also know is that interventions do not use the same standardized outcome set. And that's what we are looking at as a working group. We want to make sure that there's a core outcome set so that trials evaluating these medication adherence interventions are comparable. They are increasing that will increase the validity. And in the end, we also believe that this will be beneficial to patients and will improve their health outcomes. So if you take a closer look at our peacock, so we have adults with any rheumatic condition. We look at interventions or strategies aiming to improve medication adherence. The comparator is treatment as usual care. We are looking into the OMRECT core domain set development, and this is all be evaluated in clinical trials. So I just heard I have 2 minutes, so I need to speed up a bit. So our ambitions are to improve the quality of medication adherence research in rheumatology and make sure that these trials consistently report the outcomes that are meaningful to patients and other stakeholders. So we did already quite a lot of work. We conducted a scoping or even a systematic review. Apologies for that, Ayano. And quite a lot of qualitative work with patients and stakeholders to identify the core outcomes that are important to those participants. Currently, we started with our Delphi survey to select those most important items. We just started, or Delphi is still open. So at the table, you will find a QR code. So I would really like to ask you if you at the end of this session could please participate in our Delphi, because we really need your response. You are the expert and please help us. Even better. And for those attending online, at one of the slides, we have the QR code as well. Here it is. So we do already have some participants in our Delphi study, and I would like to present our preliminary results so you know have a better idea of what we are talking about. And okay, so I had 2 minutes, so I will skip this. I presume most of you know what we are aiming for with the Delphi. So we're aiming to identify the outcomes which are most important. We have a 3-round Delphi survey. This is online. This is in RedCap. So maybe important to mention, this is not something you are probably familiar with, but the system is more or less the same. And we're aiming for 390 participants across the groups you can see on the slides. And participants are asked to rank the importance of each survey item on a Likert scale. And then in the end, those items with 70% scored important in both groups, so in both patients and stakeholders, are included in the final core domain set. For the sake of time, I'm looking at Marika. I will also skip this one. It may be a bit technical about the Delphi methods. If you have any more questions or would like to know that in more detail, I'm happy to answer you at the end of this session. So we currently have around 60% of females in the patient's carers group. We have 73 respondents. Here you can see their nationality. So our survey is only in English. So most patients carers come from English native speaking countries, and we have a diversion of rheumatic conditions. So we have 81 health professionals and researchers, and they also come from across the globe. So happy with that. And this is our preliminary core domain set. And with the ratings of the participants, in blue, you can see the domains which are scored both 70% or higher across both groups. So these are likely to be included in the final core domain set. And we will discuss them in more detail in one of the exercises. So I will not touch upon that mostly. But what we do see is that the financial burden to the healthcare system and to individuals at this stage is not likely to be included in the final set. We also ask you in the Delphi to report on study-specific outcomes and their importance. So this is a long list. I will not discuss it in detail, but there are a few striking points that I would like to address. One is that patients value many more study-specific outcomes as important compared to healthcare providers. So this is interesting. I think it's common, but it's interesting to look at. For instance, below left column, we have health condition perception. So how patients value their health, they consider it very important to be included, while health professionals do not. So these are some interesting insights. So this is still the results of our first Delphi round. So in the next round, participants will also see the scores of the other groups. So this may change. And I think there's only one item which is ranked a bit more important by health professionals, which is medication knowledge, but it's more or less the same, around 70%. And this is what our onion is probably going to look like. So we have some mandatory domains in trials, which include medication adherence as well. We have some core outcomes for specific conditions, which are more related to the setting you are conducting your trial in. And then we probably have some important but optional domains. And I'm a bit over time, but we have enough flexibility in our schedule. So don't worry, you are able to leave at, I think, 6:30. And Alison, I think I would like to give the floor to you for the Q&A.
Thank you. So are there any questions? First of all, from our virtual group, it's not possible to actually, what we'd really appreciate is if you can use the chat. We'll monitor the chat and look for your questions in the chat. They've asked for the last slide to be put back on again with the preliminary onion. And we'll leave that to see if there's more questions. Now, from in the room, are there any questions or comments on the Delphi findings at this point? Or what's involved with the Delphi?
Is there going to be, so like the health condition knowledge, it seems, close to 81% of the patients and carers think that's really important, right, to adherence. And practically, that seems pretty important. I just wonder, is there any way to try and reconcile, or is that just out?
This is the first stage of our Delphi. We leave in those outcomes which are rated important by patients, but not by health professionals. And we hope to get it more clear in the second and third round. But in the end, if it's scored important by patients, but not by health professionals, we do not reach consensus. And then it can be included as an optional domain in the onion.
But recall, these are still preliminary. So if everybody in this room and everybody virtually adds to this, those numbers could change and you could vote it up. So consider that.
So one of the reasons of that discrepancy could be that perhaps the researchers understood many of those items like contextual factors instead of outcomes. And it's not that they are not important, it's that they are related not to the outcome itself, but to, yeah.
Maybe to follow up on that, I think it's interesting to know why it is that if you look at the priorities, that patients score things much higher than the physicians. So as an alternative, it can be that we are looking for core domains so that maybe physicians are more proactively looking for discriminative scorings to really focus on. But that's also a question, maybe I don't know how this is within other Delphis, whether it is typically that patients rate items higher than physicians. Is this also seen in many other? Is that a generic pattern? No? Yeah, this is
So for our online participants, the discussion in the room is how common is this with other working groups with their Delphis? And there's been experience both where there's similar patterns and there's been experience where it's different. That's the discussion in the room. Okay, so seeing that there's not any other questions online or in the room in regards to the Delphi, and knowing that it's preliminary, so it's probably not worth spending that much more time on it at this point. Oh, there is one question online. The only aspect that I do not understand is related to the low percentage for clinicians in health condition. Health condition knowledge is very important. Do you want to address that, Charlotte?
Well, that's difficult because I cannot speak for the health professionals why they score it lower. I think it's not that they don't think it's important. They don't think it's important enough to be included in medication adherence trials. Health condition is got 85% importance rate by health professionals.
Are there health professionals in the
Below.
room?
This one. I know it's a bit small, but otherwise I could not get it on the slide. Apologies for that. But maybe what's also good to mention is that at this stage, after the first Delphi round, for an item to be excluded, it should get 70% consensus on a score of 1 to 3 of non-importance. And none of the items got a score like that. So it was scored like on average important, a little less important. So still these items will be included in the next round.
Yeah, we'll take one more question in the room and then we'll move on to the next section.
As a health professional, can I just ask the phrase, what question was put around, or what description was put around health condition perception? Because there's a number of these where I'm just wondering if this is an interpretation.
Interpret them. What
Yeah.
a wonderful segue to our next section. So thank you. I don't have that in front of me at the moment, but that is such a, and we didn't plant this. So thank you so much for that. You will get the brown envelope with the money as soon as you've completed the Delphi. As soon as you've done all 3 rounds, you'll get the envelope. So no worries. We put on your tables in the room the outcomes definition sheet. These are some definitions, as you can appreciate, have been wordsmithed, gone through multiple iterations to get to this stage. What we are looking for at this moment is 5 minutes of silence where you observe these definitions, use a pen, and then add any comments off to the sides. It's not about grammar or sentence structure. It's, are we missing any key concepts? So we're asking for 5 minutes for you to look at these definitions, write in pen or pencil, anything that you think we should be considering in addition to what is there, and then we will collect those sheets. And this is time for our online participants to go and grab a cup of coffee. And I see some people have put down their pens. That doesn't mean that everybody else has to stop, but I'm wondering if the gentleman who has put down his pen might like to share with our online audience if there were any concerns, additional ideas with those definitions.
Yeah, I had one. This is Martin. I had one comment with the adherence phase. I think when we are discussing the implementation phase, that the definition is not correct. It says taking it correctly. But I think the word correctly, if that's the main feature, applies to all the 3 phases. I think it's also, if you start, you have to start taking it correctly. If you continue, you have to take it correctly. And if you continue to, so I think it's not the right description for the second stage.
Thank you. That's important feedback for the working group. Yes.
I've got a comment which some of the patients might like to feed back on. So whether medications have been taken as prescribed, to me, implies a very much paternalistic approach to telling patients what they should take. And I wonder if agreed might be a better terminology.
Thank you. Anything else at this table?
I have this is Robin, methodologist. As I also have an interest in contextual factors, I think the wording, whether it's what I would call a phenotype, whether it's something that the participant, the patient has at baseline or at the initiation stage, is something very different from an outcome. If it's an adherence outcome, as we decided in contextual factors, we don't talk about time-dependent things. So whether it's a phenotype, that's different from an outcome.
Thank you. I agree with Martin with the adherence phase that, I mean, I don't think you need two. I think initiation and persistence are the phases of what patients at least tell me how they feel. They start it and they keep going. And both of those phases involve taking it correctly. So I think you can take two out to simplify, or that would be a suggestion. Another thing I don't know where to put in, patients often tell me, and I don't know whether it goes under activation, but once they're feeling better, they taper of their own volition because they figure, well, you know, I don't want to take the medication or reduce my exposure, and they remain well, so they continue to do that. I'm not sure where that fits in, but it's just a point to make.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
We'll take, you can both have a turn.
I've got 47 comments. Do you want comments on the whole thing now? Is our 5 minutes up?
Give us one comment verbally and the other comments on paper.
Core outcomes for specific conditions and patient activation don't make sense to me, either of the definitions. Thank you.
Which one did he say? I may have said the same one. I find medication, medication beliefs is a real tricky one. And I think you got two questions here. One you've got is the necessity of the medication or concern with the medication. And I'm going to squeak in another one. I'm just going to say that medication acceptance should be as prescribed. There's mine.
Thank you.
Want to see another?
Anything from this table? Yes.
It's not terribly clear to me under health outcomes whether what you've put as changes to the body, emotional well-being, quality of life, is that related to the medication you are taking? Therefore, it's going to help you get the benefits you want, or the medication you're taking is going to affect your emotional well-being, maybe even cause change to the body, such as with glucocorticoids. You know, I'm not too sure what you mean in this.
Thank you. What we're trying to capture here are the initial responses, the initial reactions. Are there antibodies built up to these definitions? And clearly there's some concerns that have been raised, and that's really important. We want to make sure that we capture those, and that's why this has been a part that we intentionally wove into this workshop today. Were there any other pressing comments before we move on to the next? Yes.
I have a comment to medication acceptance and the description of it, which doesn't fit together for me. That satisfaction and acceptance is something completely different for me.
I think that just to make a little comment, I think the acceptance definition, it just copied across incorrectly. So we had a different definition for medication acceptance versus medication satisfaction. So I think your point was completely correct.
And we'll take our last comment here.
Actually, that was going to be almost the same comment. And I was going to say that, you know, the patient activation definition almost seems like that should be medication acceptance. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda.
Thank you, Alison. So we move on to our second exercise. We have a bit more time for this one. We divided you also in smaller groups, and we're going to look into implementation. Yes, into implementation already at this stage while we are still developing our core domain set. Because if we start thinking about implementation in an early stage, we can address factors that hamper or helps the implementation and the uptake of our core domain set. And I really like this quote, that only the best big idea is going to be as good as its implementation. So that's why we would like you to discuss implementation already with us. And if we run implementation evaluation parallel to the development of our core domain set, then we can also speed up the implementation and have it become more, make it more faster available. That may not be correct English, but you know what I mean? make it better available at an earlier stage for those who are going to use the core domain set. And for this second exercise, we are going to look into how we can support the implementation of a core domain set in future medication adherence trials. So it's not in usual care, it's especially for medication adherence trials. And we would like you to look at 3 different levels for implementation. We took this from the implementation science and certain frameworks. And we're going to look at the individual level. And this relates to individual researchers and other participants of trials who are going to use the core domain set. So this is very, let's say, at a small level. Then we have more an intermediate level, which relates to the organization. And this is the institute, the hospital, or a pharmacy where the researcher is working or in which the trial is conducted, which can also influence the implementation if there are barriers or facilitators at that level. And at last, we have the international level or more a policy level, which is a bit more broader, where there can be factors that help the research and a wider international research community who are going to use the core domain set. So we have these 3 levels. So for those attending in this room, you have a sheet, you have a second sheet with those levels and their descriptions. And we would like you to fill in, and you can do this together with your colleagues at your table, to discuss what could help the implementation of our core domain set in future medication adherence trials. So these are the facilitators, and what could hamper the implementation. So these are the barriers. And you have about, I think, 20 minutes for this exercise. So please also take this time to discuss these factors that could influence the implementation. And after that, we have a plenary discussion and see whether you came up with the same factors or different factors. And we're really looking forward to your knowledge, what could be helpful, so we can take it further along our process. Perfect, thank you. We know it can be a bit challenging for those, yeah. We still have questions.
Okay. Okay, let's take the chance to pull it together and see what we've learned from within the room. So I'm going to pass the microphone on to some in-room attendees to share some of their thoughts at their table.
Okay. So we discussed mainly the individual level because we thought that has the same implications later on at the organizational and the policy levels, because at the end, it's all related to research. So we discussed only the first part, and we highlighted three things. One, if the course set is too long, then we might have problems. Okay. The other challenge or barrier would be the complexity of the definitions. If they are too complex, it will be very difficult to implement. And the other is that if at the end, like he mentioned, if we decide we have this domain in, but there are no measures, it will be very difficult.
Okay, so let me see if I got that. The take-home messages are number one, that the focus on the individual level.
You want to take home message like the solutions, because we have the solutions for these problems. Okay, so the first one will be to explain better the outcomes. Okay, we also mentioned if you stratify by the phases of adherence, maybe that will be easier to understand in the next phases of the rounds. I don't know whether you can make those changes. And the other is to involve patients' associations in the project.
Thank you. Was there a response from either yourself, Charlotte, or from Mariano to that?
I have a question to understand it a bit better. So what is the barrier if the core domain set is quite long? Could you explain that a bit more from an individual level? What would be the challenge?
So the challenge is that at the end, the studies will be all different. So we will not be able to compare. That will be the challenge.
Right. Thank you.
From this table, who would like the microphone?
Well, on an individual level, I think a barrier is would be non-involvement in the people who are supposed to use it in the generation or in the generation of this core outcome set. In another way, it would be good to involve the people who are using it as far as it possible, at least at the start. And I think one thing is also information and the provision of data maybe. And here, when I look at the other item on organizational level, it would be good to have some tests done already, maybe in universities or centers who are applying it and can provide data, have done a publication on it, that on an individual level it is accepted. I mean, the same is how it reflects in the policy or international level, where you probably need first quite a number of centers having provided data that it is accepted on a policy level, even validated. Well, this was my one-man show, but.
So a couple, just as some additional things that we had some overlapping stuff with some of the others, but yes, on an individual level, just kind of the time to complete by either, the patient or the researcher. For kind of a policy international level, taking into account if and this is for the US and other countries that have like insurance, and any kind of insurance changes could also just in and of itself affect medication adherence. So I don't know if you need to take that into account, because every year we have to get a new prior authorization for medications, and if your insurance changes, you have to go through all this rigmarole. And same with that, if you want to make this accessible, just kind of considering international level, like IRBs and things like that. And then at an organizational level, sometimes there is little buy-in for rare diseases. And so any kind of changes in like electronic medical records, because you can probably implement some of this stuff into electronic medical records, but where I am, like that's challenging unless you're like a clinic that is more robust than rheumatology. So just taking that into account as well.
Yeah, just to build on that. So just to introduce myself. So I'm Shoma Chakravarti. I'm a rheumatologist and I actually lead rheumatology medical affairs for Janssen. So from a pharmaceutical standpoint, obviously, adherence and persistence is a hot topic. But one of the things I just wanted to build on was I did miss the part about the payers in this conversation. And actually, for me, it kind of goes back to your medication adherence outcome. You talk about medication taken as prescribed. By whom? So you would think the rheumatologist, but in the US, that could be a primary care physician, that could actually be a pharmacist now with interchangeability of biosimilars, which then has, for example, implications around adherence. So I would just ask that you maybe think about that piece a little bit. And in terms of, helping uptake of this, this core set here, work with the payers, because at least in the US, there's many instances where it's really out of the hands of the physicians and the patients. The payers are determining what's on formulary, what's not, and patients are getting switched, non-medical switch, in the middle of the year, for example. So adherence is out the window. So just some additional thoughts.
Can you just explain what payers are?
Payers, people who are payers. Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So there was a question on what are payers? So at least in the US, payers represent the not just insurance companies, but also the PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers. So these are the folks that are like the Medcos and Express Scripts and so on that are working with patients to help deliver drug once it's been prescribed.
I think in terms of successful implementation, I think many of us around the table agreed that it would be much easier to sell an adherence measure, independent of adherence trials. So because we consider it in almost any trial that adherence to the intervention compared to the comparator is important. And then personally, and I think George even nodded to it, 2 covariates would be helpful among statisticians. One would be a baseline measure, a context variable, and then an adherence outcome, what happened during the trial period. In terms of a successful implementation, we could use that from Monday.
Such an important design feature. Thank you.
I think there's lots of issues around where this might be used. I think most of us who are trialists see that data could be collected as an add-on to an existing clinical trial, and that's your individual patient level of your involvement. It's very hard to see health systems collecting this data, at system level, anybody collecting this data. They will go to big data, and these days they've got wonderful registries to get big data use on, and I don't see them doing a widespread rollout of any sort of PRO. Similarly, at system level, patient-reported outcome, such as what's suggested in the course that we've seen so far. I think at institutional level, it's possible they might introduce such a tool, but it seems highly unlikely to me. I've never seen that during 40 years of working in the health system, that a tool like this was ever rolled out either for a specific disease or a specific drug. So I think it's at the individual patient level, either in a efficacy trial as an outcome measure, or perhaps in an extension trial where you're looking at long-term usage. So I think you've got to be careful. One of the issues for OMERACT is we've got to make sure we produce tools that are going to be useful for somebody, that somebody's going to use. So I think the primary use here, we should focus on that and think about that. And I am certainly interested in what industry thinks to that view too. But yeah, think about, I think your individual level is your most important level of your three.
Let's give industry a chance to respond to that.
So just for clarity, so what particular part would you want some feedback on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think you touched on it, but so yes, I was just agreeing to the proposal that this could probably be like an add-on to a formal, randomized clinical trial, not necessarily like the primary endpoint of a study. But I think I also caught the piece about real world data, which is of course again something that we make use of large data sets, be it registries, be it Truven, MarketScan, et cetera, and again, that's where some of these real world factors like payers, et cetera, come in as you're trying to truly assess, adherence to a particular medication. So just another plug for working with the payers, however, be it in the US or ex-US, you see fit, but I think that's going to be a barrier if you don't.
I've just been part of a large working group from an organisation called SGO, which does osteoporosis and osteoarthritis trials, and they've done an adherence paper, and we had a wonderful meeting with regulators present, and it's very interesting where the big data side of this is all going. So EMA has been a little bit more open, I think, to using the European Medicine Agency. But FDA now is in open communication about how to use large registry data. But again, this is not the tool. So we're not producing something that will help that registry data, because trying to incorporate this and some of these elements are important. They're important to patients and clinicians, but trying to import that into routinely collected data will be very difficult.
You can think though of like standardization among more diseases, right? Because adherence is not a problem just for rheumatology. Adherence is a problem for everything. So I think the more broader, not to like make it really rheumatological specific, might help with like at least implementing it over trials of multiple diseases instead of like doing it just for rheumatology. And that might help as well with potentially even getting it into the clinic, because if multiple like systems like cardiology, GI all use it, it might actually lend at one point in your EMR. I'm not very convinced about that, but there is more hope if all these large diseases also take it. So I think we need to also keep in mind, yes, we're doing it for like rheumatology because we're rheumatologists, but I think the more we can keep it like a little bit broad that it could fit more diseases, that might actually help with implementation as well. No, which is great, right?
Which is good.
Yeah. The only thing I want to add is like there's also nothing about adolescents or pediatrics, and like they have multiple other problems. So that might not be applicable for pediatric rheumatology because of that as a pediatric rheumatologist.
Just a word on real world evidence. I'm a Paul Bird speaking with people online. I'm a rheumatologist. We run a large EMR that puts into real world evidence, and we produce a lot of persistence graphs for pharma. Now, we assume when persistence is a surrogate for efficacy and safety, which it's not, but seeing people stay on drug gives you a bit of an idea of how it's going. But we don't know if we're actually adhering. we assume because the scripts run out, we've got to redo them. Yeah, that, you know, that they're, but good enough, we're just picking them up and dumping them, what they're doing with them. So I see in real world evidence, we might be able to somehow squeeze this in somewhere to make that data more meaningful.
One thing I want you to remember about real world evidence is the word world in between is not necessarily real evidence. And I'm sure that statisticians worry about this all the time.
That's what we call SAGE. Yes.
If I may add to this, I think the first grateful client, I think for using such tools might be industry, because I mean, if industry is obviously interested in having all data available, and if you have patients not taking the medication, you have missing data. So, and this is a problem then when you come for a license in a drug. And in the same side, you get, of course, the best data if you have this tested with a level of evidence which is provided by a randomized control trial. So for my view, this would be the best to test, the best opportunity.
Okay, yeah. Hello. Okay, I'll try to do a good job. And if not, Essie will add on. Okay, so one of the things we were wondering is, so it's really important to involve also other big groups. Like, so we were wondering, for example, are there any other organization working on competing core sets for adherence? And so I'm just wondering if, you know, if you don't have, like, I wonder if it would be good to actually collaborate with them, because I'm wondering if you give your, you get your core set out, but then there's also other organizations and they don't agree with your core set, or they want other instruments. So that's one thing to maybe just take into consideration. So we don't know if you have some representative of, different other organizations. So do you have anything to add? No, okay. Okay, one of the other things, so at the individual level, but at all levels, really, we felt that if you have a core set, it shouldn't be too costly. It should be feasible, not too many measures. It should be, validated and everything in order to be acceptable and implementable. And the domain shouldn't be redundant, and you shouldn't have instruments that assess many times the same thing, I guess. Yeah. And then I think you should have also acceptance from the community in general. So meaning if you look, for example, at hospitals and trialists, in order to help them implement the core set, they should accept it. And that means that you really have to show how it's evidence-based. So probably it would be good to develop to have some publications, but also summaries, videos to explain in kind of maybe non-OMERAC language what you did, because I find sometimes some people will say, oh, it's an OMERAC paper, and we need to read the handbook in order to understand the paper. So I guess, yeah, showing that it's evidence-based and showing that you have experts and you involved everybody that was a key stakeholder. Yeah, so these are some elements. Oh, yeah, yes.
All right, this kind of went along with the real world data versus, how else you're going to assess it. Just really needs to be a degree of belief that the self-report measure is going to be valid, right?
One more comment from the back, and then Marika, can I just check, are we going to have comments online? Is there anything to address online? Would you like to address the room?
Sorry. There were some comments online, but Ayano addressed them, so that's okay. But there were comments on that there are a lot of disease specificities that are having an impact on adherence. And there was also online that they would like to see like a core outcome set, not only for clinical trials, but also to be used in clinical practice. Those are the most important comments. I asked her, but I didn't get a reply yet.
I think that's right. Did you ask me? Yeah, one comment that I wanted to make, there's been a lot of really great, robust discussions in the room We are developing this core domain set for adherence trials, not specifically for drug trials. And there's a clear difference. Adherence is important in both. But when we talk about an adherence trial, we're thinking potentially complex behavioral type of interventional trials where you're trying to address adherence in particular, for example, in a specific population, a specific medication, and seeing whether that improves outcomes for the patients and what you would measure and how you would compare those, which is a bit different to, I think, some of the conversations, which was about if you do a drug trial, measuring adherence as an outcome to be able to understand the results of that trial. So all the work to date has been about adherence trials, just to clarify a point.
For important clarification. I appreciate that, Ayano. Thank you. Go ahead. Pam.
Yeah, just a few little things. I actually heard my name is Pam Richards, for those who are online, and I'm a patient. I heard a really good talk one time by a professor who had done some work on adherence and compliance. And her conclusion was that often patients, it's not about they are just not taking their medication, but they have made an informed decision for themselves because they are adults and they can do that. So it's almost like they are not the naughty people who are not taking their medication. They've actually made an informed decision for themselves. And I wonder how much of that is down to education, explaining the disease, explaining the drug and what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to work, the whole shared decision making. Do they agree that this is the one they want to try? There is also a thing about adherence. Perhaps they can't take it because of illness. You know, if you get a cold, they can't adhere for a few weeks or whatever. Bear in mind as well, if somebody is not adhering, not taking their medication, will they be honest in completing the adherence questionnaire? So why are they not taking it? They might be embarrassed in putting that down on the questionnaire. Will you actually get the evidence that's true?
Yeah, and in relation to that, I was thinking, is there any negative effects of using a questionnaire like this? Could it make people feel that they are not a good patient because they're not taking their medication as prescribed?
Yeah, what we normally do in medication adherence studies is that we use two measures for medication adherence, because for self-reporting questionnaires, there can be socially desired answers indeed. And so there are some validated questionnaires in place, and we really look at the framing of the sentences. Like, it's really important indeed to frame it in a way that we don't point our finger at the patient like you are doing it wrong. We fully understand why some patients are non-adherent. And I think it's good on an individual level to look at what are the reasons and can we support patients in this for this non-adherence. And if it's a choice sometimes they make and they think about it, and then we should also respect it. But we're doing our best, but it's also sometimes okay to be non-adherent for a while if your side effects are intolerable, for instance.
Now, a good facilitator is not supposed to actually jump into the conversation. So, but I'm going to blow that out of the water because the reason I got involved as a patient partner in this particular working group was because of the term adherence. And there's no great option that everybody clings on to, but I prefer one of the other options is concordance, which looks at the both sides is it's agreement, concordance. Does it fit with their life? Okay, over.
That's a hard act to follow. My comment was going to be something related to Pam's lead in. One of the most insightful talks I've ever seen was about 2015 in Washington. I forget who organized the meeting. Omerac may have been part of it, but somebody from Belgium who does a lot of compliance and adherence produced the data from all the electronic pill cap studies, where you actually work out what people are doing. And his data showed that 10% of all people in all the big randomized cardiology trials, all the big studies they looked at, took no medication. Now, for most of the trials I'm involved with, 10% of people not taking the drug would be a result of positive or negative for the trial. So that amount is enough to sway the result of a trial. It's a completely frightening result. Now we come to PROs. I do worry about this being a tool just for primary adherence trials, because I wonder how often they are done. So that really worries me. But for the rest of the world, for our PROs, we now need validation against probably electronic pill cap studies to see how good we think they are and how well people are actually reporting truth.
I just want to agree with you on that adherence, the name. It used to be compliance, and we ditched that. Now it's adherence. If you look up adherence, I love when you look at these things up, it says steady or faithful attachment. So to the drug, I guess. But yeah, we make people feel guilty when they don't adhere, so that we make them sinners. So we've got to come up with a term. Concordance might be something, but that'll be part of the evolution of this, I guess, is to come up with a term that actually is better for everyone.
Compliance, yeah.
I was wondering if maybe if you look at the course set here, or proposed course set, it actually, rather than giving us information about just an outcome, whether patients are adherent or concordant or not, it actually might give us information which is more rich than that, like it's about their beliefs of this disease or their acceptance of that medication. And perhaps that would be very useful in terms of caring for our patients and outcomes for pharma company, about why, more about why there was or wasn't adherence, rather than actually there is or there isn't adherence.
A quick comment. I think it's very important down the road to think as well about who's going to utilize the numbers or the answer that we're going to generate from the scale. I'm just keeping in mind, let's think about an expensive medication where the patients say that there is no adherence. We want to make sure they're not going to be penalized by the different payers, saying you're getting paid for the medication and why you're not taking. So we're stopping paying for your medication. And the second issue is, I think we need to always keep in mind that in randomized trial, it's a completely different milieu than research studies, because in clinical trials, patients are usually surrounded by a large team to make sure, and usually the adherence are better. But while in real life, in research studies and over time, things change, it's completely different.
I'd just like to share a comment that was shared in the chat. Electronic surveillance is offensive to me. I think it is important to trust your numbers, but there needs to be another way. So it's this is from a patient partner online. So it's just something to keep in mind with other perspectives on the discussion.
Okay, maybe to wrap up a bit, we discussed which of these three levels are most important to evaluate the core domain set on, or where to target the core domain set for. We also discussed a few barriers and facilitators, the reasons for non-adherence, and how we could best measure non-adherence. Already some good suggestions for the instrument selection phase. And we also know that there are already validated measures in place. So I hope that will be helpful to speed up also the instrument selection phase. We still have some time left. I think nobody disagrees. It's a bad thing to end a bit early, but I first want to look into the room whether there are any questions or comments left. You can still shout out.
Ayano, did you want to also add? Just we'll take one comment in the room and then back over to you, Ayano.
Yeah, sure. I'll wait for my turn.
All right, this isn't a comment. It's just to say for those online, you are stars. Thank you for joining, because as a patient, it's great to know there's loads of other patients just in the background there, giving loads of input too. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Over to you, Ayano.
Thanks, Pam. I just wanted to add to the discussion about the terminology and the difficulties of the word adherence versus compliance versus concordance. Personally, doing this for many years and thinking about it, I quite like the words medication taking. It takes away some of the judgment surrounding it. And it's really just about objectively, has a drug or been taken when we're talking about medication adherence or not? How often has it been taken? What dose has been taken? How long has it been taken for? Without judgment, without saying this is the right thing or the wrong thing, because it's very individual. But I think also we need to be really mindful of the science and the difficulties of pushing the science ahead when everyone is using different languages, different definitions. And we saw that in our early scoping review. I think there were like 137 plus ways of that in different adherence trials, people were measuring and defining adherence. So I think there's two sides of that discussion, but thank you very much for that very robust discussion and for our facilitators in the room who've done a fantastic job. I'll hand back over to you, Charlotte and Alison and Marika.
Thank you so much. So then we have our wrap up. It's time to finish the session. Thank you so much for your valuable input. If you have not done it so far, please fill in our Delphi survey. As a fellow, I have tomorrow a lightning talk, and there's a poster on Thursday also showing the Delphi results. So if you want to have a discussion more in depth on the Delphi items, I'm happy to welcome you at my poster. Lynn is taking some pictures. Yeah. Please go ahead. And so thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed your this session. If you have any feedback, in the fellow session, we learned that it's good to give constructive feedback. So I'm happy to hear your constructive feedback. You can tell me one by one if you like. And I hope you have a lovely evening and we see each other at dinner.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone online as well. Thank you for joining.
Ayano, I think you can hear us.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Well done.
I'm sorry. Just give me a minute. Hi, Corinne, we're going to evaluate. Could you please? No worries. Thanks. Okay. Can you see me? Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
So, oh, I'm sorry. We just want to evaluate the session, so we will be. Okay, thank you. Okay. So I think it went quite well, although indeed you touched upon the discussion moving. So I think there was, or let's say, constructive feedback. I think it went really well. Also with the first exercise, there were some good suggestions. Also looking into the score of the Delphi ranking. I think what was a bit challenging, what we expected as well, is for the second exercise on the implementation factors. Some tables interpreted it differently. So I think this table with Corinne, they really understood the assignment, but the table in the back was more, there was a misunderstanding about what clinical trials are in our case. And it's not a drug trial, but it's an adherence trial. But you touched upon it, so that I think was good. But I think we, also for the second exercise, I think we definitely identified barriers and facilitators. And I think that, so the discussion went also on the causes of non-adherence and how to measure it, but there was time to have this discussion with the group, I think.
But what really was a point, I think, is there was also a question or more a comment of a person here that says they didn't like the definition of adherence, like prescribed in the US. He told us that.
Post. Is that us or them?
Other people and institutions can also. Ayano, I have a question for
sorry.
you.
Oh yeah,
question.
it paused for a second, but I think we're back on.
Oh, no. Can you copy the chat, Ayano?
Yeah, Aria's doing it right now.
Yeah. Okay.
We couldn't do we tried to do it all in one go, and then it's just not doing anything. So Aria's doing one by one comments.
Okay. Yeah.
So maybe it was also a bit, or Alison, you can maybe explain it a bit better, because the table in the back with the more senior OMR-actors,
they were not happy. They were not happy from the very start. I think.
Could you elaborate on why?
Yeah. They really didn't feel like, first of all, the definitions, they got their backs up with that. And I think the most senior person, the person who kept talking about clinical trials, it was clear that he was worried. They were worried that things weren't ready to take the next step forward. And that he really felt like there needed to be discussion. So I asked that if that table, I said, it appears that there might be some value in having a discussion rather than just writing a few bullet points on paper. And that's when they diffused. That's when they calmed down. And so Charlotte has offered to meet with them when they're here. And maybe if she thinks that there are conversations that need to follow up with you and her later, or whomever, that she can set those up. But as soon as we said that maybe they would appreciate further discussion rather than trying to fit within the exercise, they diffused right down and participated in the conversation. So.
Yeah, so I think this can go, or it goes two ways. One way, we expected a bit that some may not are comfortable with this exercise. On the other way, I believe personally, it's more like out of the box thinking. So they may struggle with a bit more because we don't follow the standardized orders of the OMRAC sessions. which were conducted in the past. But on the other hand, like Karine, I think she's also longer involved. She did it perfectly with answers with her group that we expected more or less. So I think it's also a bit of flexibility. And I think, well, we know their worries, but and maybe it's also a bit of lack of knowledge about implementation while looking or addressing implementation at this stage already. Like implementation
but that was
size is
known.
relatively new.
That was known.
Yes, it does know. So I
But
think
But I
it's
think the most
okay.
important thing is there's a lot of confusion about the definitions, not only domain definitions, but also the adherence definition, the clinical trials, which we're going to look into. And there was also some comments on the individual and organizational and international level, because I think that table over there pointed out that the individual level is very important to consider, but more important than the organizational and international level. He kept talking on that.
Yeah,
I
but
think,
that's
as well.
okay. That's okay.
So we should consider all these comments.
But that was also then the goal of the exercise. So then he
Yeah.
says the main barriers are at the individual level. So focus on that.
Moving this through OMERACT, a major barrier to moving this through OMERACT is going to be speaking with those individuals from the back table with conversations with Charlotte and you. If you don't do that, I can see permeating throughout in conversations. Like right now, I think they'll say, okay, we were heard. And then if you have follow-up conversations, that they can see that that's addressed, because they will influence others. So I think those conversations with them are going to be really important.
Yeah. And I think
who were the people at the back?
No, but I think, but I'm talking before my turn. I think it's a good idea because you're not here, Ayano, but Charlotte is.
Yeah.
You do some networking with the people on who were at that table, just to lighten things up a little bit and ask for advice how to proceed.
Yes, I will do.
We knew them all.
I will do, and I will. I will touch upon you. But who were those people, Marike?
I know those people. Yeah, it was Philip, and it was George Wells, and it was Robin Christensen. I know those people, and those are really experienced OMERACTors and have a lot of influence. So that was what Alison is referring to. If you don't have them on board, it will be a very difficult exercise. So I think
it's good to I think definitely it's good to see what people think and to encourage those people who are
esteemed.
Like I think it's good to have those kinds of discussions and
they appreciate
they really know the barriers.
They were actually really smiling at the end. They felt like they had an influence. And I think anyway, should we end up, or
well, just maybe like Ayano and Kathy and Aria.
Yeah,
what's your feeling about the session?
I thought it was good actually. I thought there was some interesting things that I hadn't thought about in terms of implementation, which I made some notes down, and then like there was some really good points about definition, and then I think that the thing is relevance for the group. So it's quite clear that adherence trials is very niche thing that is not relevant to the majority of the group. But once you move on to adherence measurement, then it does become more relevant to a greater audience. So I think we can't take back 6 years of work and then change direction suddenly. So it is what it is, I think, really. And then I think there was a lot of confusion, though, about what we were doing. And it sounded like some people thought that we were creating a patient-reported outcome, and that was already decided. And so that part, I think,
so maybe
I'm not sure what they were imagining in their head that is already, I think they interpreted that onion each in their own way. And interpreted where it was going to be applied, who it was going to be applied to. And so that was quite interesting to see. And it's almost like it gives you ideas as well, I think, as to, well, how could it be applied in like a different way to what, in my mind, I had already imagined or thought about. So I think it was just a very interesting exercise, really well facilitated and run. And useful comments that came back, and really useful to talk to people who would be against, you know, like say, like the voting part, like when you bring it to an OMRAC audience and they'd say vote no, like really useful to hear what they have to say and see if it is amenable or not. I don't know if the changes that we would make would please that particular set of people or not.
Yeah.
And helpful workshop.
I think we should look at the list. I think a few more people should be invited to our membership update after today. That might help as well.
Yes, particularly I think we don't really have good representation of pharmaceutical. And I think they do a lot in that, even in adherence trial space, not just drug trial space. So I think some of those people, inviting them in, if you think it's appropriate, Charlotte, to future meetings, very open to that and would be useful to get a different perspective. But I think the challenge is always explaining the context and what we're actually doing. And
Yeah, what you also see is that people, they approach exercise from their own background, like with real data or the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah, so that's, I think, always the case. Factual factor group did it also smart. Yeah, but I think I'm happy with the session, and criticism is always good to improve. Alison's a bit tired, but she had a session before this as well, so she had a very busy day.
Yeah.
But you did a great job. Yeah, so thank you so much also for preparing the slides in the data area and managing everything.
Hello.
Very happy with that.
Yeah, I think it was great. Thanks so much. We got some good feedbacks.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
Yeah, and some feedbacks that there's not much we can work on. But yeah, I think we got like so many good comments that we can think of. And yeah, I think it was good.
Yeah. Do you want us to send you? So we're going to send you the comments from the session and the people who were online and what countries they were from. And then, yeah, I can send through little notes, but I think you were all there as well. So I'm not sure. The notes might come later tonight, which might be a bit late for you. So
could they send us the list of attendees?
When you get a chance, if you can send us a list of your attendees as well, would be great. But
we have a list. I'm not sure if it's complete. So if you can send the comments by email, that would be great. Sending your notes, don't worry. I will probably not use it this week. We had Sabrina taking notes, so
yeah.
The reporting back session is on Wednesday, so I can work on it tomorrow. So that will be totally fine.
Okay, great.
The session is also recorded. So also many thanks to Alison and Marika for doing
well
it together.
Thank you.
And all the preparation, and hopefully we can make also a nice paper out of it. But we got some more response for the Delphi, hopefully. Yeah, so we'll do some work also during this week to make sure people fill in the Delphi.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.